I was there when the Terminus Est returned from the dead. Not metaphorically, as the ignorant masses speak of resurrection and rebirth. I mean it, with the literal precision that my office demands. I watched through the observation portal of the strike cruiser. Unwavering resolve as a vessel that had been atomized 3 centuries prior, reformed itself from the Imperium's festering bowels, coalescing from impossible geometries and diseases given form. I watched as reality bent, screamed, and finally broke to accommodate its return. That was the beginning of the longest day of my life. 24 hours that would test every oath I had sworn, every principle I had held, and every assumption I had made about the nature of chaos, death, and the price of knowledge. By the time those hours ended, I would understand why some truths are not meant to be witnessed, why some doors should remain forever sealed, and why the Imperium's policy of burning what it cannot understand is not mere superstition, but terrible wisdom bought with the blood of billions. This is my testimony. This is my confession. This is the record of what I learned in the putrid halls of Mortarians chosen, and why I now request my own execution. The Gothic sector had been stable for nearly a generation, as stable as any region can be in a galaxy that knows only war. I had been pursuing a cult of Nurgle worshippers through the underhives of Cataclysm Prime for 8 months, following the threads of contagion through 3 subsectors. Standard work for the Ordo Malleus: identify the corruption, burn it out, sanctify the ashes, move on. The God Emperor's work, performed by his chosen instruments. I had performed similar purges 47 times in my century of service. This one was different from the moment my astropaths began screaming. Telepaths are trained to withstand psychic trauma. They are conditioned, broken, and rebuilt to serve as the Imperium's communicators across the vast gulfs of space. When astropath Transcendent Marika tore out her own eyes and began speaking in languages that predated human civilization, I knew we faced something beyond the usual machinations of the ruinous powers. "It comes," she said, her voice layered with harmonics that made reality ripple around her words. "The garden blooms in the void. The grandfather counts his children, 7 upon 7 upon 7, and then 1 more. The ship that is not a ship, the death that gives life. Oh, God Emperor, preserve us, it sees me." She died before she could finish. Her body simply collapsed into a puddle of organic matter that immediately began growing fungal blooms. I had her corpse incinerated within 3 minutes, but the spores had already spread to 2 servitors and a junior interrogator. I ordered them burned as well. Mercy and pragmatism have long been indistinguishable in my work, but her message had been received. Something was coming to the Gothic sector. Something that had the power to reach across the warp and crush a trained astropath like an insect. I called for reinforcement. The Adeptus Astartes responded. Brother Captain Severus of the Ultramarines' 2nd Company arrived aboard the strike cruiser, unwavering resolve within 2 weeks. He brought with him a full battle company, 100 of the Emperor's finest gene-forged warriors in ceramite plate, each worth a regiment of mortal soldiers. The sight of their thunderhawks descending through Cataclysm Prime's polluted atmosphere sent the local population into ecstatic fervor. Crowds gathered in the manufactorum districts, weeping and praying as the cobalt-blue warships roared overhead. I met Severus in the landing bay of the planetary governor's palace. He was everything the propaganda vids portrayed. 300 years old, encased in Mark VIII power armor, decorated with purity seals and honor markings, a veteran of the Tyrannic Wars and the Damnos incident. His face bore the noble features of Guilliman's gene line: strong jaw, keen eyes, a presence that radiated transhuman authority. "Inquisitor Kaine," he greeted me, his voice resonating from his armor's vox grill. "Your message spoke of demonic incursion. My brothers and I stand ready to cleanse this sector in the Emperor's name." I showed him what remained of astropath Marika, The fungal growth had consumed the entire sanctified chamber where we'd burned her body. Despite our efforts to sterilize the room with sacred fire and blessed unguents, pale mushrooms now sprouted from the walls, floor, and ceiling. They pulsed with a rhythm that matched no human heartbeat. Severus studied the growth in silence. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. The confidence remained, but tempered now with caution. "This is the mark of the Death Guard," he said. "Mortarian's Legion. I have seen such corruption before on the plague world of Aurar's sepulchre." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I had rarely witnessed in an Astartes: concern. Whatever sent this manifestation is powerful and close. "The message spoke of a ship," I said. "The Terminus Est." The effect on Severus was immediate. He actually took a step back, a gesture of shock that would be imperceptible in a normal human, but was profound in a space marine. His hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his power sword. "Impossible," he breathed. "The Terminus Est was destroyed during the Gothic War. I have read the after-action reports. The Imperial Navy's dictator-class cruiser, Hammer of Justice, achieved a direct lance strike to her plasma core. The vessel was atomized. Nothing remained but radiation signatures and debris. Then perhaps you should read the reports again, brother captain. Or better yet, you should look out the observation portal and see what approaches." We stood together in the palace's strategium, surrounded by hololithic displays showing the Gothic sector's major shipping lanes and defensive positions. The space between worlds is not truly empty. It teems with vessels, asteroids, cosmic radiation, and the invisible currents of the warp. Our augurs tracked thousands of objects at any given moment. But there, at the edge of the system, was something that should not exist. It registered on the Auspex arrays as a mass the size of a city, 12 kilometers long, 3 kilometers wide, a grand cruiser of the ancient pattern that had served the Death Guard since before the heresy. But the readings made no sense. The metallic composition shifted moment to moment. Thermal signatures indicated the ship was simultaneously frozen to near absolute zero and burning at temperatures that should have vaporized adamantium. Life signs fluctuated between 0 and numbers that exceeded the population of entire hive cities. "It's phasing in and out of reality," I said, pointing to the quantum displacement readings, existing in both the materium and the immaterium simultaneously. "Brother Captain, that ship is using the warp as a shield and a weapon. It's bringing hell with it." Severus studied the data in silence. I could see his tactical mind working, processing threat assessments, calculating response options. Finally, he turned to me with a decision made. "We board it." I must have looked at him as though he'd gone mad, because he continued without waiting for my response. "Inquisitor, if the Terminus Est has returned, it means something has changed in the great game. Nurgle does not expend this much power without purpose. That vessel is not merely a ship. It is a plague vector, a temple, a living extension of the plague god's will. If we allow it to approach the inhabited worlds of this sector, millions will die. Billions if it reaches the hive worlds. Then we destroy it from orbit," I countered. "The unwavering resolve carries nova cannons. We reduce it to atoms, scatter those atoms, and consecrate the void where it existed. You said yourself it's phasing between dimensions. Our weapons cannot reliably target it. But a boarding party..." He allowed the implication to hang in the air. "A boarding party can carry melter charges, virus bombs, cyclonic warheads. We insert directly through a teleportarium breach, plant the charges, and evacuate before detonation. Clean, efficient, final." It was a terrible plan. It was also the only plan that had any chance of success. "Very well," I said. "But I'm coming with you." Severus regarded me with something between respect and pity. "Inquisitor, you are a mortal human. The environment aboard that vessel will kill you in minutes. The diseases alone. I have been inoculated against 700 known pathogens and toxins. My rosette grants me authority over all Imperial forces, including the Adeptus Astartes. And most importantly, Brother Captain, I have fought chaos for a century. I know its tricks, its lies, its corruptions. You will need someone who can identify demonic influence before it takes root. He considered this, then nodded slowly. Very well. But you will wear sanctified armor and carry a guardian spear. The machine spirits of blessed weapons may be our only defense against what we find. We had 6 hours to prepare. I spent them in prayer and purification rites, knowing they would likely prove insufficient. The teleportarium chamber of the unwavering resolve was a cathedral to holy technology. Ancient machinery surrounded the platform, each component blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus and anointed with sacred oils. Tech priests in red robes chanted Binharic Cant as they calibrated the teleport coordinates, their mechadendrites interfacing directly with the ship's cogitator arrays. I stood among the Ultramarines, feeling absurdly small despite my inquisitorial armor. The suit was a relic of my office, blessed by the High Lords themselves, ceramite plates reinforced with hexagrammic warding, rebreather filters blessed against biological corruption, internal climate control that could sustain me in hard vacuum. It made me the equal of a common guardsman. Against the traitor legions, I would be barely more effective than a child with a sharp stick. The guardian spear I carried was another matter entirely. A weapon of the Adeptus Custodes, gifted to me after I saved the life of Shield Captain Valdor during the siege of Thrax. 7 feet of consecrated auramite, power field generators along the blade, an integrated bolt weapon in the shaft. It hummed with barely restrained power, the machine spirit within eager for battle. Brother Captain Severus addressed his warriors. 50 of them would make the insertion, a devastating force by any normal measure. But against the Death Guard I feared it would be insufficient. Brothers, Severus said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of command, we face the ultimate test of our faith and genecraft. The vessel we board has been touched by the primordial annihilator. Everything within will seek to corrupt us, through disease, through despair, through the false promise of peace in decay. Remember your training, remember your oaths, remember that you are Ultramarines, sons of Guilliman, inheritors of Ultramar's legacy. We know no fear. We know no fear. The assembled warriors responded, their voices creating a thunder that shook the chamber. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that faith and gene-forged physiology would be enough. But I had seen what chaos could do to the faithful. I had seen loyal Space Marines turn traitor, their enhanced bodies making their fall all the more catastrophic. Faith was a weapon, yes, but chaos was the corruption of faith itself. The tech priests completed their calculations. Warning klaxons sounded as reality began to thin around us. Teleportarium online, intoned the magos in charge. Target coordinates locked. May the Omnisire guide your atoms through the Imperium and reassemble them in his divine image. The world dissolved into light and agony. Teleportation is not instantaneous, regardless of what the propaganda vids suggest. There is a moment, subjectively eternal, objectively microsecond, when you exist nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. When your atoms scatter across dimensions and must be recalled by arcane technology. In that moment, you are vulnerable. In that moment, the warp can reach you. I felt things touching me in the space between spaces. Wet things, eager things. They whispered promises of rest, of relief from the burden of flesh. They showed me visions of gardens where nothing hurt, where all wounds became interesting textures, where even death was just another transformation to be explored with curiosity and love. Then I was somewhere else, and those visions became reality. We materialized in a corridor that had once served a loyalist vessel, but had been transformed by 10,000 years of exposure to Nurgle's blessings. The metal walls wept pus. The deck plates squelched beneath our boots, covered in inches of organic matter that might have once been human. The air was thick enough to see yellow-green miasma that my armor's sensors immediately flagged as lethally toxic. 12 distinct plague varieties, 3 of which were unknown to Imperial medici, one of which appeared to be a living thing that hunted and consumed other diseases. But it was the smell that nearly broke me. My armor's filters should have protected me completely. They had been blessed by the ecclesiarchy, sanctified against all mortal corruption. Yet somehow, impossibly, I could smell the rot. Not through my nose, through some deeper sense, some psychic perception that bypassed physical reality. I could smell the joy in that decay, the love with which these plagues had been cultivated. I could smell the patience of entropy, the inevitability of all things returning to dust, and the perverted blessing that said dust itself was beautiful. I vomited inside my helmet. The auto-purge systems cleared it within seconds, but the taste remained. Inquisitor? Severus stood beside me, his bolter raised and scanning for threats. Are you wounded? No, I managed. Just adjusting. The psychic pressure here is immense. He nodded. I feel it as well, like breathing treacle. Keep your mind focused on the Emperor. Let his light guide you through the darkness. The Ultramarines had formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons trained on every corridor intersection and sealed hatchway. The training was evident in every movement. 300-year-old combat doctrine made muscle memory through countless battles. Yet I could see the tension in their postures. They felt it too, the wrongness that permeated this place. Auspex readings are inconclusive, reported Brother Sergeant Marcellus, studying a handheld scanner. Life signs everywhere and nowhere. The ship's layout doesn't match any known pattern. Corridors that should connect don't. Chambers that exist on the schematics don't appear on scan. It's as if the vessel is rearranging itself. Because it is, I said, pointing my guardian spear toward a far wall. The metal there pulsed like living flesh, bulging and contracting with a heartbeat rhythm. This ship isn't just corrupted, it's alive, or something close to it. The warp has merged with the Imperium here. The Terminus Est is as much demonic entity as it is a physical vessel. As if responding to my words, the corridor ahead of us began to change. The walls split open like rotting fruit, revealing chambers that hadn't existed moments before. From those chambers came the ship's crew. They had been human once. I could see the remnants, a naval officer's uniform fused to bloated flesh, a ratings identification tags hanging from what might have been a neck, the ghost of a face half visible beneath layers of tumorous growth. But whatever they had been, they were now plague-bearers, walking disease vectors transformed by Nurgle's blessings into mockeries of life. They shambled toward us with terrible purpose, their weapons, bolters, blades, claws of bone and rust, raised in welcome, and they were singing. They were. "Come to the garden," they sang in voices like drowning. "Come to the peace. Papa Nurgle loves you. Papa Nurgle wants you to rest. No more pain, no more fear. Just the gentle decay of all things returning home." "Open fire," Severus commanded. The corridor became thunder and lightning. 50 Astartes pattern bolters discharged in synchronized volleys, mass-reactive shells designed to penetrate armor and detonate inside the target. The plague-bearers came apart in explosions of corrupt flesh and ancient metal. Limbs scattered, heads exploded, bodies torn in half continued crawling forward even as their own entrails tripped them. But they kept coming. For every one we destroyed, 2 more emerged from the walls. They poured from ruptured bulkheads, from ceiling vents, from floor grates that vomited them up like the ship itself was giving birth. They felt no pain. They knew no fear. They had been blessed by their god with the greatest gift imaginable, the inability to recognize their own damnation. "Fall back to insertion point," Severus ordered. "Fighting withdrawal, maintain firing discipline." We retreated in perfect order, the Ultramarines training overcoming even the horror of our situation. But as we moved, I realized something that chilled my blood more than the plague zombies ever could. The corridor behind us had changed. The teleportarium landing point, the place where we could signal the unwavering resolve for emergency extraction, was gone. In its place was a sealed blast door decorated with the 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided, and something worse, Mortarian's personal heraldry, the skull and scythe of the Death Guard. We were trapped. Brother Sergeant Marcellus planted a melt-a-charge on the blast door, while the rest of the company maintained a firing line. The plague-bearers had stopped their advance, standing just beyond effective range and swaying in place like rotten grain in a diseased wind. They were waiting for something. "Charge set," Marcellus reported. "Detonation in 3, 2... The melt-a-charge exploded with a blast of superheated gas that should have vaporized the door. Should have. Instead, the metal simply absorbed the heat, glowing briefly before returning to its original corroded state. Where the charge had struck, new growth appeared, fungi and polyps that spelled out words in High Gothic. "Welcome, Seekers. The Grandfather awaits." "Throne of Terror," someone whispered. "Silence," Severus snapped. Then, more calmly, "We proceed forward. Standard breach and clear protocol. Watch your firing lanes. Check your brothers for signs of corruption every 2 minutes. If anyone shows symptoms, any symptoms, they report immediately. Understood?" "Yes, Captain," the chorus responded. We advanced into the ship's depths. The Terminus Est revealed itself in layers of horror. Each chamber we entered was worse than the last, not because of any escalation in violence or viscera, but because of the care evident in the corruption. These were not random mutations or chaotic transformations. Every plague, every tumor, every strand of bacterial growth had been cultivated with the patience of a master gardener. This was art in the most obscene sense possible. The deliberate transformation of the human form into something that celebrated decay as the highest aesthetic. We found a medici bay where the wounded had been healed. Their injuries had been replaced with interesting infections. A severed arm now sprouted 7 new limbs, each ending in a different hand. A head wound had bloomed into a garden of neural tissue that formed faces, each one smiling in placid contentment. The patients, if they could still be called that, thanked us as we burned them. They thanked us even as holy fire consumed their flesh. We found a chapel where the ship's priest had led his final service. The congregation sat in their pews still, fused to the benches by centuries of organic growth. Their hands were clasped in prayer, but the god emperor's aquila had been replaced by Nurgle's symbols. Their priest stood at the pulpit, his mouth stretched impossibly wide, still delivering a sermon that would never end. As we passed, his eyes tracked us, and I heard his words directly in my mind. They told us the emperor had forsaken us. They showed us that rot and renewal were the same. They taught us to love what we had become. We burned that chapel to ash, but the priest's words remained. Hour after hour we pushed deeper. The plague-bearers harried us constantly, but never in sufficient numbers to stop our advance. It was as if they were herding us, as if all of this, the resistance, the horror, the constant pressure, was orchestrated, directed, purposeful. It was Brother Tacitus who first showed signs of infection. We had been aboard for 7 hours when he stumbled during a breach maneuver. Just a small thing, a moment of imbalance that would be meaningless in a mortal, but was profound in an Astartes. Severus noticed immediately. "Brother Tacitus, report your status." "I am well, Captain. A momentary lapse. It won't happen again." But it did. 3 chambers later, Tacitus stumbled again. This time I saw the cause. a small pustule on his neck, visible above his armor's gorget. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the ship's walls. "Tacitus is compromised," I said quietly to Severus. "The infection is spreading." Severus saw it too. For a moment, the brother captain's face showed the weight of command, the burden of making the decision that doctrine demanded. Then his features hardened into the mask of duty. "Brother Tacitus, you will advance forward as point. Take position at the next junction and hold until relieved." It was a death sentence, and everyone understood. Tacitus would go forward alone to draw enemy fire while the company advanced. He would die in battle rather than risk corrupting his brothers. It was the Emperor's mercy, delivered by a commander who cared for his men enough to give them clean deaths. Tacitus saluted. "It has been an honor, Captain. Tell my brothers of the Third Company that I died as an Ultramarine." "I will. The Emperor protects, Tacitus. The Emperor protects." We heard his bolter firing for 3 minutes, then silence. We did not retrieve his body. There would be nothing worth retrieving. That was the first brother we lost. It would not be the last. 10 hours into the mission, we reached what the ship's corrupted layout suggested was the central cathedral. The chamber defied physics. Too large to exist within the vessel's known dimensions, yet undeniably real. The ceiling rose hundreds of meters overhead, lost in clouds of toxic vapor. The walls were living things, pulsing with tumorous growths the size of battle tanks. And in the center, growing from the deck like an obscene tree, was a structure that might have once been a command throne. It was occupied. The death god Terminator sat in patient repose, his armor a relic of the heresy era, cataphractii pattern, blessed by a dark god, maintained through unholy rites for 10,000 years. He was immense, even by the standards of the traitor legions. His armor's trim bore Nurgle's symbols and what I recognized as kill markings from conflicts dating back to the Scouring. This was no common plague marine. This was a champion, a lord of the 14th of Legion, a warrior who had stood beside Mortarion himself in the desperate hours after the fall. He rose as we entered, and reality bent around him. The psychic pressure I had felt since boarding intensified 1,000-fold. This was not merely a corrupted space marine. This was something more, something that had transcended mortality through 10 millennia of service to the plague god. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the chamber and through our minds simultaneously. "Welcome, sons of Guilliman. Welcome, servant of the corpse god. I am Typhon of the Death Guard, Herald of Nurgle, captain of the Terminus Est. I have been expecting you." Typhon. Not just any Death Guard lord, but Calas Typhon himself. Mortarion's most trusted lieutenant, the architect of the Death Guard's fall, the one who had damned his entire legion to eternal servitude. He was myth-made flesh, a legend from the darkest days of the heresy, and he stood before us as real as death itself. Severus stepped forward, his power sword ignited and wreathed in crackling energy. "Your vessel will be destroyed. Your plague will be stopped. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, I declare you excommunicate traitors. You will die this day, traitor." Typhon laughed. It was a wet, horrible sound, but there was genuine amusement in it. "Die? Brother, I died 10,000 years ago on the ship we called Eisenstein. What you see before you is merely what remains, what was transformed, perfected, made eternal, and I have not brought the Terminus Est to this sector to wage war." "Then why?" I demanded, surprising myself with my own boldness. "Why return? Why risk exposure?" The Chaos Lord turned his attention to me, and I felt the weight of his regard like a physical thing pressing against my soul. "Ah, the Inquisitor speaks. Tell me, servant of the false Emperor, what do you know of the cicada?" The question was so unexpected that I could only stare. Typhon continued. "The cicada lives underground for years, 7, sometimes 17. It dwells in darkness, feeding on roots, waiting. And then, when the time is right, it emerges. It transforms. It lives briefly in the light, singing its song, creating the next generation. Then it dies, satisfied that its purpose has been fulfilled. He gestured around the corrupted cathedral. The Terminus Est is Nurgle's cicada. We have dwelt in the warp for 3 centuries, growing, changing, becoming something new. And now we emerge, briefly, to spread our song, to plant the seeds of the next cycle. You cannot stop this, Ultramarine. You can only witness it. Then we'll witness your death, Severus said, and charged. The battle that followed transcended my ability to adequately describe. I have seen Astartes fight before. I have witnessed their transhuman prowess, their gene-forged superiority. But watching Severus duel Typhon was like witnessing demigods clash. The brother captain moved with impossible speed, his power sword carving arcs of light through the toxic air, each strike precisely placed to exploit weaknesses in Terminator plate. His brothers provided supporting fire, bolt rounds hammering into Typhon from multiple angles, forcing the Chaos Lord to divide his attention. But Typhon was beyond mortal limitation. His movements were ponderous, weighed down by the massive Terminator armor, yet each gesture carried apocalyptic force. When he swung his plague scythe, reality itself seemed to rot along the blade's path. Where his footsteps fell, the deck corroded and sprouted new life. And he was laughing, the sound echoing through the chamber like a funeral bell, tolling for the universe itself. You fight well, son of Guilliman. Your gene-father would be proud. But tell me, what are you fighting for? The Imperium? That bloated corpse state that devours its own children to feed an emperor who has been dead for 10,000 years? The God Emperor? That psyker who denied his own divinity, who failed his sons, who created the very demons that now feast upon his realm? Severus didn't respond with words. He responded with a perfectly executed strike to Typhon's knee joint, the power sword's energy field finding the gap between armor plates. Corrupted blood sprayed, and Typhon staggered. But it wasn't enough. Typhon's counterattack was devastating. The scythe swept in a wide arc, and 3 Ultramarines simply ended. Their armor corroded to nothing. Their gene-enhanced flesh melted like wax, their enhanced bones crumbled to powder. 3 warriors who had served the Emperor for centuries, reduced to organic slurry in an eye blink. You see? Typhon said, his voice tinged with something that might have been pity. You cannot win. You were never meant to win. This entire incursion, this desperate boarding action, it was expected, welcomed, part of the design. It was then that I understood. The realization hit me with the force of a thunderhammer to the chest. This isn't an invasion, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is an inoculation. Typhon turned to face me, and behind his helmet's visor, I could sense his smile. The Inquisitor comprehends. Grandfather chose well when he drew you here. Explain yourself, traitor, Severus demanded, his sword still raised despite the deaths of his brothers. I answered before Typhon could. He doesn't need to conquer the sector, he just needs to expose it. Every world we've passed, every ship within scanning range of the Terminus Est, every Vox transmission that mentioned its presence, they're all infected now. Not with physical disease, but with knowledge. With the idea that the Death Guard can return from oblivion, that chaos is not merely persistent, but unkillable. That even atomization is not permanent if the dark gods will it. Understanding dawns, Typhon said. The plague is not biological, Inquisitor. It is memetic, psychological, spiritual. Every soul who learns that the Terminus Est has returned will doubt, will question, will wonder what else might return from the grave. And in that doubt, in that fear, cracks will form. And into those cracks, Nurgle's blessings will seep. He raised his scythe, and the chamber's walls began to pulse faster, the heartbeat rhythm accelerating. You came here to destroy me, to plant your bombs and reduce this vessel to atoms once more. But you cannot destroy an idea. You cannot atomize doubt. And you certainly cannot kill that which has already transcended death. Watch me try, Severus said, and the Ultramarines charged as one. What followed was slaughter. Typhon moved through their ranks like a plague wind, his scythe reaping lives with agricultural efficiency. These were not merely death blows. Each strike was a teaching moment, a demonstration of Nurgle's gifts. Brother Cornelius took a hit to the shoulder and watched in horror as his arm transformed into a tree of bone and sinew, branches sprouting where fingers had been. Brother Erasmus tried to flank and found his legs fusing together, his bones restructuring into a serpentine tail that could not support his armor's weight. Brother after brother fell, not dead but transformed, their bodies becoming monuments to the plague god's twisted creativity. And Typhon laughed throughout, not with cruelty but with genuine joy, as if he were sharing the universe's greatest joke and pitied those who couldn't understand the humor. I realized we had perhaps 3 minutes before the entire strike force was corrupted or dead. I looked at my guardian spear, felt its machine spirit hungering for battle, and made the only decision I could. I activated the teleportarium beacon hidden in my armor. The warp opened around me, and through it I called for help. Not to the unwavering resolve, their teleportarium couldn't lock onto coordinates inside a warp-touched vessel. I called deeper, into the space between spaces, to those who dwelt there and might listen to an Inquisitor's desperate prayer. I called to the Emperor himself. What answered was not the God Emperor, but it was close enough. The thing that emerged from the warp tear was radiant and terrible. It wore the shape of an angel, if angels could be forged from golden light and righteous fury. It carried a flaming sword that burned with psychic fire, and it spoke with a voice that was legion, a chorus of the faithful dead who had served the Emperor across 10,000 years of endless war. We hear your prayer, child of terror. We witness your faith. We shall be your shield. I have no proper classification for what I summoned. The Ordo Malleus has theories, fragments of the Emperor's psychic might given form, echoes of dead saints preserved in the warp, manifestations of humanity's collective faith made real. Perhaps it was all of these. Perhaps it was none. In that moment, classification didn't matter. It attacked Typhon with the fury of righteousness incarnate. The chamber became a battleground between light and decay. The angel thing's sword carved through the toxic air, each strike burning away corruption and leaving only sanctified ash. Typhon met it with his scythe, and where the weapons clashed, reality screamed, the walls ruptured, the deck buckled. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the ship's hull groaning as the laws of physics fought to reassert themselves against the dual intrusion of warp entities. "Severus!" I shouted over the cacophony. "Get your men out! Now!" The brother captain's face was a mask of blood and determination. Half his company lay dead or corrupted around him. His armor was scored with decay, but his eyes still burned with the fire of Guilliman's legacy. We cannot leave without completing the mission. The mission is complete. I thrust my guardian spear toward Typhon, and the angel locked in their cosmic duel. We've learned what we needed to learn. This ship isn't a weapon, it's a message. We have to deliver that message to the Imperium before it spreads unchecked. Understanding dawned in Severus's eyes. He touched his vox bead, calling to his surviving warriors. All Ultramarines fighting withdrawal to the teleportarium coordinates. Move. But Typhon heard us. Even locked in combat with an entity of pure faith, he heard and understood our intent. His laughter rolled through the chamber like thunder. "Run, little servants, run back to your corpse god and tell him what you've seen. Tell him that death has no dominion over those blessed by Nurgle. Tell him that his Imperium rots from within, sustained only by lies and the sacrifice of souls that could know peace." The angel drove its flaming sword through Typhon's chest, and for a moment I thought we had won. The Chaos Lord staggered, his armor rupturing, his corrupted blood spraying in arterial fountains, but he did not fall. Instead, he grabbed the blade with his bare hands, pulling the angel closer, even as holy fire consumed his flesh. "You want to know the joke, angel?" Typhon whispered, his voice somehow audible despite the maelstrom of psychic energy surrounding them. "I welcome this pain. I cherish it, because every wound is a garden where new life will grow. You cannot kill me because I have already accepted death. I have made peace with entropy. Can you say the same?" The angel shrieked, a sound of such pure anguish that 3 more Ultramarines fell to their knees, blood pouring from their eye lenses. I felt my own mind fragmenting under the psychic pressure, felt reality itself beginning to crack like thin ice over a bottomless lake. "Teleportarium locked," someone was shouting through the Vox. "Extraction in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. An eternity in combat. A heartbeat in the scheme of the universe." Severus grabbed my shoulder with a strength that would have shattered mortal bone. "Inquisitor, when we return, you will tell them everything. You will make them understand the threat. Swear it." "I swear it," I said, not knowing if I could keep such a promise, but knowing I had to try. The remaining Ultramarines formed a defensive circle, their bolters barking defiance even as the plague-bearers closed in from every corridor. I saw Brother Marcellus take a scythe to the chest and keep fighting, his primary heart destroyed but his secondary still pumping, his gene-forged body refusing to acknowledge the mortal wound. I saw Brother Cassius tackle 3 plague marines to give his brothers time to retreat, his last words a prayer to the Emperor lost in the roar of detonating grenades. They died as they had lived, as warriors of the Imperium, unbroken, defiant, certain of their righteousness, even as the universe conspired to prove them wrong. The teleportarium activated. The last thing I saw before reality dissolved was Typhon pulling the angel down into an embrace, his corroded lips pressed against its radiant face, in a kiss that was both obscene and oddly tender. The last thing I heard was his laughter, genuine and joyful, as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a pleasant diversion in an existence that stretched toward infinity. Then I was in the light between spaces again, and the wet things were touching me, and they were no longer whispering promises. They were singing victory hymns. We materialized aboard the unwavering resolve, missing 27 warriors. 27 Adeptus Astartes, each worth a regiment, each representing centuries of training and gene modification, each a walking testament to the Emperor's vision of transhuman perfection. Gone. Corrupted or killed in the space of 14 hours. The survivors were in catastrophic condition. Power armor hung in tatters. Purity seals were blackened and corrupted. Several brothers showed signs of infection, pustules growing along nerve clusters, eyes clouding with bacterial film, skin taking on the greenish tint that heralded Nurgle's touch. Severus collapsed the moment we materialized. His armor's machine spirit was screaming damage reports, but it was the biological corruption that concerned me more. A wound along his ribs, barely visible through the rent in his ceramite, pulsed with sickly luminescence. "Quarantine protocols!" I shouted to the medicae staff, rushing to meet us. "Full biological containment. No one touches these warriors without blessed armor and consecrated tools. Move!" The ship's chirurgeon, a wizened man enhanced with augmetic arms and enhanced vision, took one look at the returning warriors and went pale. "Inquisitor, these men need immediate treatment. The corruption, I know what they need. Do it. I'll be in the observation deck." I needed to see, needed to understand what we'd unleashed. The Unwavering Resolve's primary observation portal offered an unobstructed view of local space. Through the reinforced armor glass, I could see the Terminus Est hanging in the void, like a gangrenous wound in reality itself. It had grown since our insertion. The vessel was now 15 kilometers long, its hull bulging with tumorous growths that sprouted into the vacuum like the branches of some obscene tree. Ships that had been too close to its translation point were drifting, their crews dead or dying, their hulls already showing signs of corruption. But it was the psychic resonance that truly terrified me. I am not a psyker. The Inquisition prefers its Ordo Malleus operatives to possess will rather than power. But I have been trained to recognize psychic phenomena. What emanated from the Terminus Est was not merely warp energy, it was something more insidious. It was an idea given psychic weight, a concept made manifest through the belief of billions, the idea that chaos could not be defeated, that death was not final, that the Imperium's victories were temporary at best, delusions at worst, and we had helped spread it. Every Vox transmission since the Terminus Est's arrival had mentioned it. Every astropath who had sensed its presence had shared that knowledge with their peers. Every naval officer who had seen it on Auspex arrays had filed reports that would be copied, catalogued, distributed throughout the Administratum's vast bureaucratic network. Within weeks, the entire Gothic sector would know. Within months, the story would spread to neighboring sectors. Within a year, half the Imperium would have heard that a Death Guard vessel had returned from atomization. Typhon had been right. This wasn't an invasion. It was an inoculation of despair. Inquisitor Kaine. I turned to find Severus behind me. He had been stripped of his armor and wore simple medical robes, his enhanced physique making him appear simultaneously vulnerable and impossibly dangerous. The wound along his ribs had been treated with blessed unguents and sealed with hexagrammic wards, but I could see the corruption still fighting against the treatment. His flesh pulsed with an alien rhythm. "You should be in quarantine, brother captain." "I should be many things," he said quietly. "But I am here because we need to talk about what happens next." I gestured to the viewport and the obscene vessel beyond. "What happens next is we destroy that thing before it can spread further." "With what?" "You saw what it did to our boarding party. A full company of Ultramarines reduced to less than half strength in under a day. How many more warriors would we need to sacrifice? How many ships would we lose in the attempt? And for what? Typhon was right. We cannot kill an idea. So we do nothing. We let that abomination spread its corruption unchecked." Severus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of service and the terrible wisdom that came with it. "No. We do something far more difficult. We tell the truth." I laughed, a bitter sound even to my own ears. "The truth? Which truth, Captain? That chaos can resurrect its vessels? That our victories are meaningless? That the Emperor's protection is insufficient?" "No," Severus said firmly. "The truth that despite all of this, despite the horror, despite the corruption, despite facing an enemy that claims to be unkillable, we still fought. We still resisted. We still wounded them. That angel you summoned, whatever it was, it drove a sword through Typhon's heart. We made them bleed. We made them acknowledge us. We proved that faith, even in the darkest hour, has power. 27 of your brothers died proving that point." "Yes, and they died as heroes. They died knowing they served something greater than themselves. They died with purpose." He turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his eyes that I had rarely witnessed in an Astartes: genuine emotion. "Inquisitor, I know what you're thinking. I can see it in your face. You think we should suppress this information, classify it, bury it so deep that the Imperium never learns what we witnessed. You think you're protecting them." He was right. It was exactly what I had been thinking. "But you would be wrong," Severus continued. Because the greatest lie chaos tells is that we are powerless, that resistance is futile, that the Imperium is already dead and we're merely the last spasms of a corpse. If we hide this truth, we confirm that lie. We tell the Imperium that its servants cannot handle knowledge of the enemy's power. We infantilize them, we weaken them, or we protect them from despair, I countered. Knowledge of this incident could break faith across 100 worlds. It could lead to mass panic, riots, even rebellion. The Imperium is held together by belief in the Emperor's protection. If that belief is shattered, then it was never real faith to begin with. Real faith is not ignorance of the threat. Real faith is facing the threat and choosing to believe anyway. That is what the Emperor taught. That is what he embodied. That is what we must embody. A proximity alarm interrupted our conversation. The Terminus Est was moving. We watched through the viewport as the massive vessel began to sink back into the warp. Reality rippled around it, the materium reluctantly releasing its grip on the chaos-touched ship. But before it disappeared entirely, something happened that I still struggle to explain rationally. The vessel spoke, not through vox, not through psychic projection. It spoke through the fundamental fabric of reality itself, its words appearing as disruptions in the viewport's armor glass, as interference patterns in the ship's electrical systems, as sudden understanding that bloomed unbidden in our minds. Remember us. Tell them we returned. Tell them we will return again. The cycle continues. The garden grows. Death is not the end. Then it was gone, leaving only radiation signatures and the lingering psychic stench of its presence. Holy Throne, someone whispered behind us. I turned to see the ship's captain, a grizzled void warfare veteran named Hestus, staring at his instruments with an expression of profound shock. Inquisitor, you need to see this. The Auspex displays showed something impossible. In the 4 hours since the Terminus Est had translated into the sector, 17 ships had reported unexplained equipment malfunctions. 32 astropaths had experienced prophetic nightmares. 114,000 citizens across 6 worlds had reported symptoms of an unknown illness. And those were just the incidents that had been officially logged. How many more had gone unreported? How many more would manifest in the days to come? The infection had already begun. Captain Hestus, I said, my voice steady despite the horror I felt, prepare a priority transmission to the Inquisitorial Fortress on Scintilla. Maximum encryption. I need to speak with Lord Inquisitor Kripman immediately. At once, Inquisitor. As Hestus moved to comply, Severus placed a hand on my shoulder. What will you tell them? I thought about the question carefully. The Ordo Malleus had procedures for situations like this. Standard protocol would be to quarantine the sector, purge any corrupted worlds, and suppress all information about the incident. Billions would die in the cleansing, but the infection would be contained. The knowledge would be buried. The Imperium would continue in ignorance, strong in its false certainty. But Severus's words echoed in my mind. Real faith is facing the threat and choosing to believe anyway. I'll tell them the truth, I said finally. All of it. The Terminus Est's return, Typhon's message, the nature of the memetic infection. And then I'll recommend that we don't suppress it. Severus's eyes widened fractionally, a profound expression of shock for an Astartes. You would risk mass panic? Sector-wide despair? I would risk truth, I said. Because the alternative is to become what Typhon accused us of being, servants of lies, priests of a dead god maintained only by ignorance and fear. If the Imperium cannot face the knowledge that chaos can resurrect its champions, then perhaps it doesn't deserve to survive. Those are dangerous words, Inquisitor. These are dangerous times, Captain. We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the void where the Terminus Est had been. Somewhere out there, 17 ships were experiencing equipment failures. 32 astropaths were dreaming dreams that would spread like viruses through the psychic network. 114,000 citizens were developing symptoms that no medici could cure. The plague had already spread. The question was whether we would acknowledge it or deny it. "I need to ask you something," I said to Severus. "That wound on your ribs. How advanced is the infection?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. "The chirurgeon estimates I have between 3 and 6 weeks before the corruption overwhelms my body's defenses. After that, I will either die or become something else. Something that serves the grandfather of plagues rather than the emperor of mankind. Then you know what must be done. Yes, I will request the emperor's peace before the corruption advances. I will die as I lived, as an ultramarine, loyal to the throne and true to my gene-father's legacy. There might be another way. The biologist laboratories on Scintilla have access to technology from the Dark Age. If we could get you there in time..." "No," Severus said firmly. "I will not risk becoming a vector for this plague. I have seen what it does. I have watched my brothers transform into walking nightmares. I will not inflict that on others, no matter how small the risk." It was the response I had expected, the response I would have demanded if he'd given any other answer, but hearing it still hurt. "For what it's worth, brother captain, it has been an honor serving alongside you." He smiled, a rare expression on an Astarte's face, made more poignant by the certainty of his approaching death. "The honor has been mine, Inquisitor. You fought with courage today. You made choices that most mortals could not have made. You summoned something holy from the warp itself. That takes faith of a kind I rarely see even among my brothers. I was desperate. All true faith begins with desperation, with acknowledging that we cannot save ourselves, that we need something greater. You reached out to the Emperor in your hour of need, and he answered. Whatever that angel was, wherever it came from, it came because you believed it would. That matters." The Vox system crackled. Captain Hestus's voice echoed through the chamber. "Inquisitor, we have established connection with Scintilla. Lord Inquisitor Cryptman is waiting to receive your report." I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what I was about to do. Preparing to speak truth to power, to risk my own execution for the sin of honesty, to potentially shatter the faith of billions in the name of preserving something more important than faith, reality itself. "Captain Severus," I said formally, "your testimony will be crucial to my report. Will you stand with me?" He straightened to attention, every inch the proud warrior despite his medical robes and corrupted flesh. "Until my last breath, Inquisitor. Until my last breath." We walked together to the communication chamber, two servants of the Imperium about to commit what many would consider the gravest heresy, telling the whole truth, regardless of consequences. The communication with Lord Inquisitor Cryptman lasted 6 hours. I held nothing back. I described the teleportarium insertion, the nature of the Terminus Est's corruption, our encounter with Typhon, the losses we had suffered. I explained the memetic nature of the infection, how knowledge itself had become a weapon, how the very act of learning about the Chaos Vessel's return made one vulnerable to its influence. And I explained my recommendation, that we not suppress this information. The silence that followed my report was profound. Through the Vox link, I could hear Cryptman breathing, could imagine him weighing my words against 10,000 years of inquisitorial doctrine. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Inquisitor Kaine, are you aware of the Protocol Extremis, the standing order that grants inquisitors the authority to enact exterminatus on compromised worlds?" "Yes, Lord Inquisitor." "And are you aware that we could interpret your recommendation as evidence of corruption? That allowing such knowledge to spread could itself be considered service to the ruinous powers?" "I am aware, Lord Inquisitor. I am also aware that I may be wrong, that my judgment may have been compromised by what I witnessed. But I must believe, that the Imperium is stronger than chaos gives it credit for, that humanity's faith can withstand truth. Another long silence. Then, surprisingly, Cryptman laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound, but genuine nonetheless. Do you know what the greatest irony of the Inquisition is, Kaine? We are charged with protecting the Imperium from threats it cannot comprehend, using methods it cannot sanction, pursuing knowledge it cannot handle. We are guardians who must lie to those we protect, and every lie weakens the foundation we claim to defend. I waited, not daring to hope. Your report will be forwarded to the High Lords of Terror with my full endorsement. The incident will be classified, but not suppressed. Those with need to know will know. The wider Imperium will learn a sanitized version. Enough truth to understand the threat, but not so much as to inspire despair. Does that satisfy your conscience, Inquisitor? It does, Lord Inquisitor. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You and Captain Severus will be required to testify before the Conclave of Hereticus. Your every word will be examined for signs of corruption. Your every thought will be scrutinized. This process may take years. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Severus, standing beside me with the calm acceptance of one who had already made peace with death. He nodded once. We are prepared, Lord Inquisitor. Then the Emperor protects Kaine. May he grant you the strength to endure what comes next. The Voxlink went dead. Severus and I stood in the communication chamber, processing what had just transpired. We had been granted a reprieve, but also sentenced to years of investigation and scrutiny. The Inquisition would tear apart our every motivation, examine our every decision, test us in ways that would make our time aboard the Terminus Est seem gentle by comparison. I should return to the Medici Bay, Severus said quietly. The chirurgeon will want to monitor my condition. How long do you think you have? 3 weeks, perhaps, maybe less. The corruption is persistent. He touched the wound on his ribs and I saw him wince. It whispers to me, Inquisitor. It tells me that pain is unnecessary, that I could end this suffering by simply accepting the grandfather's gifts. That peace is just a choice away. And what do you tell it in return? He smiled that rare, beautiful smile again. I tell it to go to hell. I tell it that I am an Ultramarine and we know no fear. I tell it that pain is a reminder that I'm still human, still capable of choosing righteousness over comfort. And then I recite the catechism of the Codex Astartes until the whispers fade. Does it work? Sometimes. Not always. But it works enough. We parted ways then. Severus to the Medici Bay, where he would spend his final weeks fighting a losing battle against corruption, and I to my quarters, where I would begin composing the comprehensive report that would define the rest of my life. But before I left, I asked him one final question. Captain, do you regret it? Boarding that ship, losing your brothers, dooming yourself to this slow death? He considered the question with the same seriousness he brought to all matters of importance. When he answered, his voice carried absolute conviction. No, because we learned something vital. We learned that chaos fears truth as much as we do. That Typhon wanted us to despair, wanted us to believe resistance was futile, specifically because our resistance matters. If we were truly powerless, he wouldn't have bothered with the psychological warfare. He would have simply destroyed us. That's an optimistic interpretation, perhaps. But optimism is also a form of resistance, Inquisitor. When the universe tells you to despair, hope becomes an act of defiance, and defiance is what we were made for. I watched him walk away. This doomed warrior who had given everything in service to an Imperium that would barely remember his name. I thought about the 27 Ultramarines who had died in that cursed vessel, their sacrifice reduced to a line in an official report. I thought about the millions who would die in the coming months as the memetic plague spread, their suffering a footnote in the administratum's endless ledgers. And I thought about Typhon's laughter, echoing through the warp, celebrating the cosmic joke of existence. Brother Captain Severus of the Ultramarines' Second Company died as he had lived, with dignity, purpose, and unwavering faith. When the corruption finally overwhelmed his enhanced physiology, when the whispers became screams and his flesh began its final transformation, he requested the Emperor's peace. I granted it personally, placing my guardian spear against his primary heart and activating the power field. He died instantly, his last words a prayer to the Emperor and a message for his chapter. Tell them, I did my duty. We burned his body with holy fire and scattered the ashes in blessed space. It was a warrior's funeral, witnessed by his surviving brothers and sanctified by the ship's chaplain. If there were tears, they were hidden behind ceramic visors and gene-forged stoicism. But I wept. I wept for him, for his brothers, for all the souls lost to chaos's endless hunger. I wept because I was still human enough to feel loss, to comprehend the tragedy of wasted potential, to mourn what might have been. The Gothic sector burned in the aftermath of the Terminus Est's visit. Not literally, there were no planetary invasions, no orbital bombardments, no conventional warfare. But the memetic plague did its work with insidious efficiency. 4 worlds experienced faith riots as populations lost confidence in the Emperor's protection. 7 ships mutinied, their crews convinced that service to chaos offered better survival odds than loyalty to the Imperium. 12 astropaths committed suicide rather than continue receiving the dreams that plagued them. And across 100 systems, in whispered conversations and forbidden texts, people began to wonder, if chaos could resurrect its champions, what did that say about the Emperor's power? The Inquisition responded with characteristic brutality. 3 worlds were placed under quarantine. 2 were subjected to exterminatus, their populations deemed too corrupted to save. Thousands were arrested, interrogated, and executed for the crime of doubt. The administratum worked overtime to suppress information, to maintain the carefully constructed lie that the Imperium was winning, that the Emperor's protection was absolute, that faith would triumph over all adversity. But the lie had cracks now, and through those cracks new doubts would grow. Typhon had been right, we couldn't kill an idea. I stood before the conclave of hereticus, 3 of the most powerful inquisitors in the segmentum obscurus, and awaited judgment. For 6 months, they had examined every aspect of my report. They had verified my claims through independent investigation. They had subjected me to psychic interrogation, chemical analysis, and theological examination. They had tested my faith, my loyalty, my very sanity. And now, finally, they would render their verdict. Lord Inquisitor Cryptman spoke first. Inquisitor Valerius Kaine, this conclave has reviewed your actions aboard the Chaos vessel designated Terminus Est. We have examined your decisions, your recommendations, and your subsequent conduct. We have found... He paused, and I prepared myself for the sentence of death. That your actions were in accordance with your authority as an Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus. That your recommendations, while unorthodox, were made in good faith and with the Imperium's best interests at heart. And that your continued service is both valuable and necessary. I felt my knees weaken with relief. However, Cryptman continued, his voice hardening, you will be assigned a permanent overseer. Inquisitor Jaina Oris will accompany you on all future missions, observing your conduct and reporting directly to this conclave. You will submit to weekly psychic examination. You will undergo monthly theological review. Any sign of corruption, any hint of heretical thought, will result in immediate termination. Do you accept these terms? I do, Lord Inquisitor. Then this conclave is concluded. The Emperor protects, Inquisitor Kaine. The Emperor protects. I left the chamber, officially vindicated but permanently under suspicion. It was, I reflected, exactly what I deserved. I had been exposed to knowledge that should have destroyed me. I had witnessed truths that contradicted a millennium of Imperial doctrine. I had made choices that could have doomed entire sectors. That I survived at all was miraculous. That I survived with my authority intact was unprecedented, but I understood the Conclave's reasoning. They needed me. Needed someone who had faced Typhon and lived, who understood the nature of the memetic threat, who could identify and counter similar attacks in the future. I was valuable precisely because I was corrupted, not in body or soul, but in knowledge. I had been inoculated with a small dose of truth, and that made me immune to larger doses of lies. Inquisitor Gina Oris was waiting for me outside the chamber. She was young by inquisitorial standards, barely 60 years old, enhanced with rejuvenate treatments that made her appear 30. Her augmetic left eye glowed with psychic sensitivity, marking her as a sanctioned psyker. She studied me with an expression of clinical curiosity. "So you're the one who boarded a Death Guard plague ship and lived to tell about it," she said. "I've read your report 17 times. I still can't decide if you're the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," I said. "Perhaps." She extended her hand, and I shook it. Her grip was firm, confident. "I'm to be your shadow for the foreseeable future. The Conclave believes you might be compromised. I'm here to ensure you don't become a threat to the Imperium." "And if I do?" She smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Then I'll kill you myself. Quickly and cleanly, as befits a servant of the Emperor. No hard feelings." "None at all." We walked together through the inquisitorial fortress, two servants of the God Emperor, bound together by duty and suspicion. Outside, the city of Scintilla sprawled in all its Gothic glory, billions of souls living, working, dying in service to an Imperium they barely understood. They were ignorant of the threats that surrounded them, unaware of how close they came to annihilation on a daily basis. Part of me envied that ignorance. Part of me wished I could unknow what I had learned, unsee what I had witnessed, return to the simple certainty I had possessed before boarding the Terminus Est. But ignorance was no longer an option. I had been changed by my experience, transformed not by chaos, but by truth. And with that transformation came responsibility. "Inquisitor Oris," I said as we reached the fortress gates, "I need to tell you something. Something that wasn't in my official report." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what might that be?" When I summoned that angel, that entity of light and faith, I felt something, a connection, a presence that was vast, beyond comprehension, but also intimately aware of me. It wasn't the Emperor, not exactly, but it was something related to him, something that exists because billions believe it exists. "You're describing a warp entity, a demon formed from human faith." "Yes, exactly. But here's the thing. If faith can create something that powerful, something that can fight chaos itself, then what does that say about the nature of the Emperor? What does it say about the Ecclesiarchy's teachings? What if the God Emperor isn't what we think he is, but is instead what we've made him through 10,000 years of worship?" Oris stopped walking. Her augmetic eye whirred as it focused on me with laser intensity. "That sounds dangerously close to heresy, Kaine. Does it? Or does it sound like truth? If the Emperor draws power from humanity's faith, then every prayer matters. Every devotion strengthens him. Every soul that believes makes the Imperium more resilient. That's not heresy. That's the entire foundation of the Imperial cult." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. When she spoke, Her voice was carefully neutral. We'll be discussing this topic extensively in your theological reviews. For now, I'd advise you to keep such speculation private. Understood? But the seed had been planted, the question had been asked, and once a question exists, it cannot be unasked. The Terminus Est was sighted again, this time in the Armageddon sector, then in the Maelstrom zone, then near the Cadian Gate. Each appearance lasted only hours, but each left the same memetic infection in its wake. The knowledge that chaos could not be permanently defeated, that resurrection was possible, that death was not the end. The Imperium adapted. New protocols were established for handling such incursions. Quarantine procedures were refined, memetic countermeasures were developed, liturgies and prayers designed to strengthen faith in the face of doubt, ritual purifications meant to cleanse contaminated minds. I participated in these efforts, my experience making me uniquely qualified to advise on anti-chaos psychological warfare. Inquisitor Oris accompanied me everywhere, her watchful presence a constant reminder that I was both valuable and suspect. We grew to respect each other, she and I. We would never be friends, the nature of our relationship precluded true friendship, but we developed the professional trust of soldiers who have fought side by side. Together, we hunted Nurgle cults across a dozen worlds. We identified and neutralized memetic infections before they could spread. We saved lives, preserved faith, served the Emperor with every resource at our disposal. But late at night, when I was alone in my quarters and the weight of knowledge pressed down upon me, I would think about Typhon's laughter. I would remember his words about the cicada, about cycles and transformation. I would wonder if we were truly fighting chaos or merely playing our assigned role in some cosmic game beyond our comprehension, and I would pray. Not the rote prayers of the Imperial cult, not the formulaic liturgies designed to protect against corruption. I would pray with genuine uncertainty, genuine questioning, genuine faith that somehow, despite everything, there was purpose to this suffering. I don't know if the Emperor heard those prayers. I don't know if he exists as the ecclesiarchy claims, or if he's merely the psychic gestalt of humanity's desperate hope, or if he's something else entirely. But I know that faith matters. I know that resistance matters. I know that even in the face of cosmic horror, in the presence of enemies that claim to be unkillable, the simple act of choosing to believe has power. Severus taught me that. He died proving it, and I would live honoring it. This report will be sealed upon my death and opened only by those with clearance level obsidian. It contains truths that the Imperium is not ready to face, questions it is not prepared to answer, doubts it cannot afford to acknowledge. But it also contains hope. Because if there is one thing I learned in those 24 hours aboard the Terminus Est, it is this. Chaos fears our defiance. It fears our resilience. It fears that despite 10,000 years of corruption, despite endless war and suffering, despite every rational reason to despair, humanity still chooses faith. Not blind faith, not ignorant faith, but faith that acknowledges the darkness and chooses light anyway. Faith that sees the horror and resists nonetheless. Faith that understands death is not the end, but decides that how we live matters more than what comes after. That is the faith that summoned an angel from the warp to fight a Chaos Lord. That is the faith that sustained Severus through his final weeks. That is the faith that holds the Imperium together when all logic says it should collapse. And that is the faith I carry forward into whatever darkness awaits. I was there when the Terminus Est returned from the dead. I witnessed its power. I survived its corruption. I learned its terrible truths. And I am still here, still fighting, still faithful. That in the end may be the greatest act of defiance possible in a galaxy that knows only war. The Emperor protects. Not because he shields us from all harm, but because he gives us the strength to endure the harm we cannot avoid. And in that strength we find purpose. We find meaning. We find hope in the midst of darkness. We find the will to continue. There is one final truth I must record here in this sealed document that will only be read after my death. A truth I have shared with no one, not even Inquisitor Oris. A truth that would see me executed immediately if discovered. When the angel fought Typhon in that corrupted cathedral, when their weapons clashed and reality screamed, I felt something beyond the psychic pressure and cosmic horror. I felt recognition. The angel was not separate from me. It was not some independent entity summoned from the warp. It was an extension of my own faith, my own desperate belief, magnified and given form by the Emperor's power, or by whatever the Emperor has become after 10 millennia on the Golden Throne. And in that moment of recognition, I understood something terrible and wonderful. The Emperor is dying, has been dying for 10,000 years. The Golden Throne fails a little more each day, the ancient technology breaking down, the psychic wards weakening. Within my lifetime, perhaps within decades, the Emperor will die. But he will not end, because billions believe in him, because trillions pray to him, because the collective faith of humanity has created something in the warp, not a demon, but not entirely unlike one. A psychic entity formed from devotion and desperation, from hope and fear, from every prayer ever uttered in his name. When the physical emperor dies, this entity will remain. And it will be more powerful than he ever was in life, because it will be sustained by the belief of an entire species. Typhon understood this. That's why he laughed. Because the greatest irony of the Imperium is that in trying to save the emperor, in maintaining the fiction of his godhood, we have actually created the god they worship. The ecclesiarchy's lies have become truth through the sheer weight of belief. And Chaos knows this, knows that humanity's faith is becoming a weapon as powerful as any they possess. That's why the memetic warfare, that's why the Terminus Est was sent, not to conquer, but to sow doubt, to weaken faith before it becomes too strong to overcome. We are engaged in a war of belief, a war where truth and lies are weapons, where faith itself is the battlefield. And in this war, ignorance and knowledge are both dangerous, both potentially fatal. I don't know if the Emperor planned this. I don't know if he foresaw that his rejection of godhood would lead to his enforced divinity. I don't know if he would approve of what we've made him into, but I know that we cannot stop now, cannot reveal the truth of his condition, cannot shatter the faith that sustains him, sustains us all. So I will take this knowledge to my grave. I will continue to serve the God Emperor, knowing he is both more and less than what the Imperium believes. I will fight chaos with every tool at my disposal, including the lies that have become our greatest weapon. And when I die, perhaps my faith too will join that vast psychic gestalt. Perhaps I will become one more voice in the chorus that is the Emperor's new existence. Perhaps that is what awaits us all, not the Emperor's peace, but absorption into his growing consciousness. It should terrify me, perhaps it does, but I find comfort in it as well, because it means we are not alone. It means that every prayer, every devotion, every sacrifice matters. It means that the Imperium's faith is not delusional, but the most powerful force in the galaxy. And it means that when Typhon laughed, when he claimed victory, he was wrong. Because faith that can create gods is faith that can destroy demons. And humanity's capacity for belief, for hope in the face of despair, for defiance against impossible odds, that is our true power. That is what chaos fears. That is what will save us, or damn us. Only time will tell. To whoever reads this after my death, I served the Emperor for 147 years. I fought his enemies on 100 worlds. I made choices that saved millions and damned billions. I saw things that should have destroyed me and witnessed truths that should have broken me. I survived because I chose to believe that meaning exists, that purpose endures. That even in a galaxy that knows only war, there is still something worth fighting for. The Terminus Est taught me that the greatest weapon chaos possesses is not corruption of the body, but corruption of hope itself. The moment we accept that resistance is futile, we have already lost. So resist, always. Even when logic says otherwise. Even when the odds are impossible. Even when death is certain. Resist because resistance is what makes us human. Because defiance in the face of darkness is the truest form of faith. Because choosing to stand when you could kneel is the highest form of worship. I was there when the Terminus Est returned from the dead. I witnessed the horror. I learned the truth. And I am still here, still faithful, still fighting. That is my legacy. That is my testament. That is the message I leave for those who come after. The Emperor protects, not because he shields us from harm, but because he gives us the strength to endure. Use that strength, honor it, pass it forward, and never, ever stop fighting. For in the grim darkness of the far future there is only war, but there is also hope. There is also faith. There is also the indomitable human spirit that refuses to surrender even when all seems lost. And that, in the end, is enough. It has to be.